Okay. Hi, this is Hatham from horsepowercalculators.net. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do a big turbo versus small turbo comparison using our virtual dyno app. The virtual dyno is available online on horsepowercalculators.net. It's also available in the App Store and iTunes. Just search for virtual dyno. It's also available on Android. In Google Play Store, just search for virtual dyno Pro for the Pro version of the app with all the features and the unlocked dyno runs and everything. So before we get started, it says welcome to our virtual dyno. This is going to run you through the basics of the app. First thing, you're going to input your stock and rebuilt engine details so it can calculate volumetric efficiency and get a mathematical model of your engine. Then you're going to input compressor and intercooler details for supercharged or turbocharged setups, so it's going to be able to calculate density ratios based on compressor efficiencies and cooling and temperatures. All those correction factors are actually built into that. Then you're going to go and input your intake and exhaust dimensions, which calculates two things: pressure drops based on how big or small your intake and exhaust parts are, and then resonance tuning depending on the resonance tuned length of, let's say, your header pipes or your intake manifold dimensions. And then after that, it's going to combine volumetric efficiency with density ratios, with pressure drops, with resonance tuning to come up with an accurate dyno model. And then once it creates that dyno run, you're going to be able to share it, produce a PNG image that you can share online by clicking this share button down here. After the dyno page, there's an extra analysis page that you can go through, and you can identify which parts are restricting power on your setup. So if you have undersized valves, you're going to see that you have a high pressure drop associated with valves, or if you have undersized intake system, you're going to see that show up on the analysis page. The numbers shown in red on the analysis page are parts that need to be modified, lengthened or shortened, increased in size or reduced a little bit. It depends on what the specific part is and how you can adjust it to maximize power. At any point, you can click on the info button, which is this I button right here, and that'll show you the numbers that are being stored for your engine. So if something's going wrong there, you can check it and figure out what's going wrong or what numbers you need to adjust to make the dyno work. And there's also a help button, which is the H button right here. If you click on the help button at any time, there's going to be a form you can fill out and send, which will email me your details and where you're stuck, so I can help you figure out what's going on. And that's it. Welcome to our dyno. Let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and load this featured platform. This was saved by one of our users. It's a 6-cylinder Camaro, naturally aspirated, 160 horsepower at 6,300 RPMs. I'm going to load this as an example. So he inputted these numbers in standard units. So it's a 207 cubic inch motor with a 5.4 inch rod, 160 horsepower. I'm going to go ahead and, this is already loaded. I'm going to go ahead and look at the modified engine. I'm not going to change the bore or stroke. I'm not rebuilding this engine, so we're keeping everything stock. We're just going to compare turbos right now. Stock engine is naturally aspirated, all motor. Modified run is also naturally aspirated, all motor for now. I'm not going to change any of these numbers, the intake system, the exhaust system, heads and cams. I'm keeping all of this stock just to show you a baseline run. So here's our baseline run. After completing any of your runs, you can share your runs. Just click on the share button. So here we are. Stock is 160 horsepower and modified is also 160 horsepower, because I haven't changed anything yet. So now we're going to add some boost. I'm going to go back all the way to my power adders. Power adders, modified. So this is the modified run. I'm going to be adding a turbocharger. To make the difference between a big turbo and a small turbo more apparent, I'm going to be using a high boost number, so 18 pounds of boost. Let's say it spools at 3,000 RPMs. Compressor efficiency, so I'm going to choose a small turbo to begin with. At 18 pounds of boost, these are the recommended turbos. Smallest one is an IHI RHF55 that the dyno recommends. Yep, but this compressor map doesn't have efficiency rings on it. So I'm going to look for a different turbo. Let's look at the TO4 E40 trim. So here we go. This turbo has 73% efficiency at peak power, and then at peak torque it's off the compressor map. So it's not a good turbo to use here. Let's look at something else. Aerocharger. Looking at about 40% efficiency at peak torque and 68 efficiency at peak power. So I can't actually find any small turbos for this setup. Usually a smaller turbo will have... Here, let me show you what I'm trying to talk about. The virtual dyno calculates that we're going to have about 360 horsepower at peak at 18 pounds of boost. But let's say I look for a 300 horsepower turbo right here, like the KKK K24. One or more of your points are off the compressor map, that's okay. Or even less, 280 horsepower. I'm going to look for a turbo that gives me peak efficiency at peak torque, which is similar to what you would find with a stock turbocharger. Something like this. These are actually good turbos for this setup. You get good coverage on the map. 200. Sorry, that's a supercharger. KO3, this is a nice turbo for this setup. A really wide compressor map. Okay, here's something that we can talk about. Here's a Garrett T3 45 trim. So I can install a Garrett T3 on my 6-cylinder Camaro. I'm going to have about 72% efficiency at peak torque, and I'm going to have maybe 60% efficiency at peak power. I'll go back here, 72% efficiency at peak torque and 60% efficiency at peak power. To make this more apparent, I'm going to use a small stock size intercooler. 2 inches by 6 inches by 6 inches, just to make sure I'm comparing turbos here. So I'm going to run the simulation, and we're going to look at what a small turbo optimized for peak torque is going to do on this engine. So here we go. We produce about 300 horsepower from our T3 18 psi. I'm going to refresh, so I'll get rid of that middle run. So this is my stock run. Is 160 horsepower. And my modified run with a T3 at 18 pounds of boost with a small intercooler, I'm going to be producing close to 300 horsepower. So this is my small turbo. Has peak efficiency at peak torque, which is very similar to what you'd find as a stock turbo setup. Now I'm going to go back and choose a different turbocharger, like one that the dyno recommends here. So I'm going to choose this TO4. This is a little too big. We're going to go down a little bit and search for a 350 horsepower turbo. Maybe actually a 300 horsepower turbo. We had some that were giving us really nice coverage on the map. So here we have about 74% efficiency at peak power and 50% efficiency at peak torque. So this is an example of a properly sized bigger turbo for this engine. We got 74% efficiency at peak power and about 50% efficient at peak torque. Same intercooler size, same boost level, same spool RPM. And we're going to compare our big turbo with peak efficiency at peak power with our small turbo that peaks out at peak torque and see what happens. And there you go. So this is a typical, this is our K27, I believe that was, at 18 psi. It's a KKK, I don't remember which one, but it was a KKK turbo at 18 psi. And this is what you'd expect from a big turbo versus small turbo comparison. Small turbo has peak efficiency at peak torque, and there it produces a little more horsepower at peak torque, but it struggles at high RPM. And then bigger turbochargers usually have higher efficiency at peak power, a little less efficient at peak torque. And you see, if I go over here, this is 286 horsepower at 4,000 versus 273. So I've lost 13 horsepower at 4,000 RPMs, which is about 30 foot-pounds of torque, which is kind of significant when you're cruising around. And I've gained about 10 horsepower, maybe a little less, at peak power. So it's a trade-off of top end versus mid-range, and that's what you'd expect to see from a big turbo versus small turbo comparison. Now I'm using a small intercooler here because if I had used a really large intercooler, you wouldn't have seen this difference. The intercooler on the small turbo would have made up for the efficiency drop, would have cooled the air, and it would have produced better numbers. So you wouldn't have seen that much of a difference between the smaller turbo versus the big turbo. So now what I'm going to try and do is show you the analysis page and how we can further optimize this setup. It says, congratulations, the engine has over 100% volumetric efficiency. What else does it say? Welcome to the 300 horsepower club, thank you. High boost club, yes, 18 pounds of boost. And yes, I'm one of the first people to sign up for the dyno because I created the dyno, so I'm actually the first customer to use this. Let's look at our pressure drops. Our intake valve has a little bit of a restriction. Our exhaust valve has a lot of restriction. Our header primary pipe and our catalytic converter, we're losing about 6.5. We're losing about 8 pounds of boost in our exhaust system, and a little more in our muffler. We'll go next. Our camshaft is okay for the power band. We can slightly tweak our duration down a bit so that we can maximize our power band. And our header resonance, this is a turbocharged setup, so we're not going to optimize header resonance here unless you're using a remote mount turbo. Let's go back. I'm going to try and optimize my exhaust valve first. Our modified setup at 35. I'm going to try and use a 36.5, 1.5 millimeter oversized exhaust valve and see if that solves the problem. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We actually lost a little bit of horsepower, so the problem isn't we lost a little bit of power, so the problem isn't the diameter of the valve, it might be a restriction with lift. So I'm going to go back and increase lift on my camshaft. There's an optimum lift to diameter ratio that you need to achieve to reach peak flow. So I see here we have 8.5 millimeters of lift. I'm going to increase that a little bit. Let's go to 10.5 millimeters of lift on the exhaust valve and see what happens. There we go. We've gained about 22 horsepower from increasing lift on our exhaust cam. So this is our high lift cam. And we're quickly starting to see how our 160 horsepower engine with 18 pounds of boost, the right turbocharger, and a better cam is producing more power. The camshaft lift has done something really interesting here. We're producing more torque now with the larger turbocharger than we were with the smaller turbocharger. So even though the turbo is less efficient at peak torque, adding lift had fattened up the entire power band upwards and given us a little more power at peak torque as well. We're still not doing as well as the small turbo right here on the lower RPM ranges, but the top end looks a lot more fantastic right now. So I'm going to look at our analysis page again. Exhaust valve is no longer a major restriction. The number isn't red anymore, but we can do a little better on our header primary pipe, our catalytic converter, and our muffler. We'll go back and see what kind of exhaust this car had. So let's say we step up to 1.5 inch primaries, a high flow cat, and straight through muffler. And I'm still keeping the 2-inch pipe diameter. I'm just improving my runners, my cat, and my exhaust system. This is kind of a budget setup. We're not even changing the piping on the exhaust system. And here we go. We produce 357 horsepower. That's pretty nice. High flow exhaust. The same 18 pounds of boost. So these are all runs done at 18 pounds of boost. This is a small turbocharger. This is the large turbocharger. This is with cams, and this is with a proper exhaust. And it's pretty dramatic to look at 360 horsepower with supporting mods versus 300 horsepower without. That's really cool. I can go back here and see what else I can do. Intake valve is okay, exhaust valve is okay, catback piping is okay, rear muffler is okay. Just for argument's sake, let's step up to a 3-inch exhaust, which most people would do for this kind of setup, and see what happens. Not much of a difference. 2-inch exhaust versus a 3-inch exhaust at 300 horsepower isn't much of a difference really on this setup. That's good to know. It's less of a pressure drop, but it's not really significant. And there is final power results. I think that's probably because we're using 18 pounds of boost, so we're overcoming that restriction. It's not a big deal. So there you go. This is our final dyno run. I'm going to go out and share this. It's uploading our dyno image. And this is, I'm going to try and share that. I'm just going to open a new page. Right. I'm going to share it on a page I manage, on Supercharger Performance page. Big turbo with supporting mods versus small turbo comparison. This is how to number 1. I'm going to share the link. Alright, I'm also going to tweet this. Virtual dyno results. Big turbo with supporting mods versus small turbo. This is virtual dyno how to number 1. Alright, so that was it for our first demonstration of the new Virtual Dyno app. You can get this app in the App Store, you can use it online. You can get it on Google Play. It's very accurate and it helps you save a lot of money on modifications. You can try different combinations of parts before you buy them. You can try different cams like I did. You saw me try a 1.5mm oversized valve, and we didn't gain any power with that. If you were to try that in the real world, you would have sent your head out. They would have had to refit valves. They would have had to reshim the head for the valves. Then you'd have to install it again, and then you go to Dyno and figure out that you didn't get any power because it wasn't the valves that was the problem, it was the camshaft lift. So I just saved you all that amount of that work, that hassle, that money. You can just run different simulations on the Virtual Dyno, figure out what works and what doesn't, and then go and buy the right parts and maximize your power and save time and money on modifications. That's how this works. It's a really great app. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and send me comments and feedback on the video, or tell me if you want me to run different simulations, what you'd like to see, and I'm glad to record them for you and help you out in any way that I can.